Let's talk PFM. So that's the session. We are all set to start, and we have the Pefa Secretariat's research competition report out, and that's the first one. This is the first in the series, and we have this discussion webinar on participatory budgeting for service delivery and beyond. So we are honored to have Rosemary Strupp, Head of Macroeconomic Support, State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, Switzerland, a great supporter of PEFA and a great supporter of also the PEFA research competition, unpacking PEFA scores, working on PEFA for broader PFM reforms is the overall theme in which we are operating the research competition in a mutually reinforcing way, both for the PEFA Secretariat and for the broader PFM community. So Rosemary would chair this event and take this through. Let me turn over to Rosemary, welcoming you to chair the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Srini, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and a warm welcome to our esteemed panel of speakers and all our participants to this PEFA webinar on participatory budgeting for service delivery and beyond. So thank you everyone for joining us. Let me first give a little bit of background on PEFA and the event before we turn to the topic of discussion. So the PEFA framework, which is the main product of the PEFA program, has really become the de facto diagnostic tool for analyzing PFM systems and to inform reform programming. There have now been over 650 assessments in 153 different countries, really with different income levels from Afghanistan to Germany, with different administrative traditions and in different geographical regions. And PEFA has really also extensively been used by development organizations such as the World Bank or us. So SECO, as Srini has mentioned, has been engaged in the PEFA program since its inception 20 years ago and is still a very proud supporter. But a key question for all PEFA partners that we continue to discuss every time we meet is how to strengthen the link between PFM and development outcomes, like service delivery. As you know, evidence of what works and what does not is still very weak. And because of its extensive expertise and data on PFM, we believe that PEFA can play a unique role in improving data and evidence on how PFM reforms really can make a difference on the ground. So this is really why PEFA partners have established the PEFA research competition in 2019. And the PEFA research competition now is the main avenue through which PEFA generates knowledge by commissioning PFM research through an annual research call. And the insights gathered are intended to inform the continuous improvement of the diagnostic framework and the guiding documents. And importantly, I think, and this is also why this event is so important, to improve our collective understanding on effective design and implementation of PFM reforms. And this research exercise is also complemented by the PEFA's global report on PFM. It was launched for the first time this year in February, and it's actually the first time all PEFA data has been put together to examine global PFM trends. And we continue to include deep dives going forward on specific topics in the subsequent publications. So on today's event, it's really an important milestone. It's based on one of the first research products from the 2019 research competition and was focused on links between PFM and service delivery. And it will offer insights on the ongoing discussion on how participatory budgeting works in practice and what does not work so well, and what we need to do differently. So your feedback and inputs are really very important. So the research team, based on PEFA data, has looked at links between PFM system improvements and health outcomes, and then did an in-depth case study, how participatory budgeting contributes to the processes in Benin. So they have engaged and consulted widely with government, municipalities, development partners and NGOs, discussed the findings, and with the feedback provided, incorporated that in the report. So I'm really happy that we can continue this discussion today. Also coming from Switzerland, I think these are very interesting questions. I mean, from a Swiss perspective, because we're interested in basic democratic processes, but as a donor, of course, or a development partner, I think we're all keenly interested in understanding how to improve development outcomes. So on the session, I will now first ask Mr. Alexander Arobio, practice manager in the World Bank, who oversees the governance work in Benin, to share opening remarks. Later, we'll have the presentations by the research team, which is Philippe Lassou, Kelum Jayasinghe, Teruenso Baroyen, and Pawan Adhikari. The presentation will focus on the key findings of the report, which is on the opportunities and challenges of participatory budgeting. And the presentation will be followed by commentators' comments and a QA session. And I will ask Adenike Ayeyola, practice manager from the World Bank, to moderate this discussion. I'll now first invite Alexander to make the opening remarks. Over to you, Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to give this opening remarks, and many thanks to all of you for joining this very interesting and important discussion today. I would like first to welcome the research on participatory budgeting in Benin by Professor Lassou and his team, fostering health service delivery via public financial management, the case of participatory budgeting in Benin's local governance. I read it with a lot of interest, and I look forward to the discussion. Let me say a few words around this question. The key question the research paper and the event today will pose is how could we make participatory budgeting more effective and inclusive, a more effective and inclusive mechanism for service delivery. Participatory budgeting was initially implemented in Porto Alegre Council of Brazil during the 80s, and it proved to be a useful PFM tool in the redistribution of economic resource and service provision. Since then, the practice has spread across the world: Africa, America, Asia, and Europe. The World Bank has alone significantly invested over the past decade on the development activities, embedding an element of public participation. For example, in DRC, with the bank's support, participatory budgeting has played an important role in bringing communities closer to local government with more transparency and more accountability. Almost 8,000 citizens have been involved in 20 territorial decentralized entities in choosing projects on behalf of their communities. We have observed several successful examples of participatory budgeting in our work. At the same time, depth and extent of public participatory budgeting's implementation and its efficacy seem to be limited and lacking the dynamism in many countries that would make it an effective and structural instrument, despite general acceptance of its principle by communities. In this condition, mechanisms to offer space for citizen engagement, and how can it become more sustainable and deeply embedded in the structures of between local communities and decision makers. Researchers such as Wampler identify 4 conditions conducive to the effective adoption of participatory budgeting: a receptive civil society, strong mayoral support, a supportive political environment, and sufficient financial resources. But then, how do we ensure this happens in practice? Should we, as PFM community, take participatory budgeting more seriously in our engagement and support its development? The paper recommends embedding a participatory budgeting feedback process at national and subnational levels to foster sustainable adoption by communities. How could we support this? Could national or international guidelines help in embedding effective practices? Should donors focus more on training and empowering local communities to take over the processes? This research paper is overall in line with the governance unit and governance practice priorities, aiming to strengthen service delivery and social contract in West and Central Africa through core, strong and further develop core institutions, DRM and transparency and accountability. So it is for us a very important question, something we are really looking forward to support in future and to work around together with practitioners and communities. And we are really looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandre, for these interesting introductory comments. And I'd now like to hand over to Niket to moderate the session. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody that is connected. And thanks, Rosemary and Alexandre, for the very good introduction to the topic. Again, the topic we're discussing today is participatory budgeting for service delivery and beyond. And very specifically, we'll be talking on a research paper that was developed, fostering health service delivery via public financial management, the case of participatory budgeting in Benin's local governments. The last time I checked, we had 90 participants, and our participants are made up of practitioners, policymakers, development partners, academicians, all working on public financial management and with interest in participatory budgeting. So I welcome you to this very important session today. As you're aware, we have the very interesting paper which has been developed by a team led by Professor Philippe Lassou of the Guelph University in Canada. And we have other researchers, including Kelum Jayasinghe, Teruvin Subaroyen, permit my pronunciation, and Pawan Adikari from the University of Essex. So I welcome you all today. So the first thing we're going to do is have the presentation, a brief on the paper by the authors, and then we're going to have 5 interventions. We'll have 5 people who will be giving comments on the paper and on their perspectives of participatory budgeting generally. I'll introduce them as they come, but generally we have someone who is a stakeholder in Benin. We have the GIZ, a development partner. We have an expert from the World Bank. We have the International Budget Partnership and someone from the Pefa Secretariat who supported in this work significantly. So without wasting much time, I will ask Professor Philippe to make the brief presentation, and then we go to the commentaries. So Professor Philippe, are you ready for us?
Thank you, Adenike. Yes, so really let me just share my slide. Okay, does it show?
Yes, your slide is showing.
Okay. Okay, thanks. And again, thanks, Adenike. And you know, I will introduce the background and the context, and then I will pass on to my research team members to present the key findings from the research. So as Rosemary and Alessandra have already kind of emphasized, PFM, public financial management, is seen as a mechanism in the formulation of development policy, and ultimately for the delivery of public goods and services. And participatory budgeting as one of the mediums in achieving that. So hence we examined how the use of participatory budgeting translate these PFM attributes in addressing basic but essential community needs, including community health service to communities at a subnational level in Benin. This is Benin's map. And looking at Benin, Benin's context matters for the Francophone region. As it's shown on the African map here, this is Benin, okay, is member of the West African Economic and Monetary Union on the left-hand side here, and within the broader Francophone region, which is the shaded area on the African map here. So beside the French language that characterize the region, they share in common the same budgeting and public financial management framework. Again, on the context, Benin has 77 municipalities with over 50 ethnicity groups. Many of these groups, such as Pearl, Fula, Hausa, Ewe, are common to many of the countries within the region and beyond. For example, you see Ghana is not a Francophone country, but they share the community of Ewe with Benin and Togo. They characterize local communities. So if we're looking at participatory budgeting, we need to understand how local communities are organized. These communities, this group, characterize their shared customs, a way of organizing social life. And we identify these as crucial to understanding locals' way of life and how they interplay with participatory budgeting practices, and in the process, how they shape the practices to reflect their local realities in attending to their needs and aspirations. The formal framework for participation budgeting in Benin is provided by a legislation enacted in 1999 that established the municipalities. The law emphasized participation of citizens and community members in the formulation of the municipal development plan, also known locally as the Plan de Développement Communal. And this is akin to the medium-term estimator framework. Okay. At the same time, like in many countries in the region, the law also poses some challenges, particularly regarding bottom-up budgeting initiatives. As a side note here, we document in a report how some of the communities managed to innovate around these even structural kind of challenges to formulate solutions to some of the most pressing need, particularly in the area of health, which is we emphasize in the title of a research. The key point here is that in the existing, despite the existence of a framework that provide for participation, the nature of the participation provided for appear not to be well in line with or in the spirit of participatory budgeting as experienced elsewhere. But interestingly, citizens and other stakeholders leverage on the avenue offered by this framework to innovatively introduce participatory budgeting, not necessarily in line with what is done elsewhere. Okay, so despite not having a framework that embed this into the practices, but the community managed to get around this and managed to shape participatory budgeting that reflects local context and realities. So I will not kind of say too much. To carry out this study, we employ a multi-case study approach. We conducted the field work from May to July last year, 2020. And the field work basically involved the identification of a key stakeholder in a field, engaged in the process, the collections of some key documents, interview with key local community members and key government officials, both at the central and the local levels, and other actors like civil society groups and so on. So I will pass on to my colleagues to present the main result that form the basis of our recommendation for a sustained use of participatory budgeting to address service delivery need of communities. So I'll pass on to my colleague Kilo from this point.
Thanks, Philip. Before we just go to Philo, I just want to say great research. We've read through the research. So we just like to come up with the key aspect, the key message of the research paper. If we can just do that in 10 to 15 minutes so that we can have a discussion around the paper. Thanks very much.
Sorry, this part is presented by Pawan Nadikar. Yeah, I'll come back for the next slide. Pawan is
Okay, thank you very much, Callum, and thank you to everyone. And our first recommendation concern with setting up an organization for monitoring and coordinating participatory budgeting. What we found was the involvement of different individuals, organizations, local governments in the delivery of participatory budgeting and in different forms of intervention. However, what is lacking is the presence of some sort of national agency that could coordinate this intervention and delivery and bring all those who are involved in the participatory budgeting process. We also found a lack of guidance with the statutory backing. So our idea is that it's very important for Benin or for other countries to establish national agency and statutory regulations which could, so that all the parties, individuals involved in participatory budgeting process would be more engaged, and we can ensure that the adequate resources have been devoted in the implementation of participatory budgeting. And that agency could also facilitate monitoring and evaluation of the implementation process, basically the allocation of the resources. And as in the case of all reforms, one-size-fits approach to participatory budgeting may not work. And that is already evident in many different countries, for instance, in Japan, in Indonesia, as well as in other countries. So we argue that it's very important when developing regulations or the agency that the regulations should comply with this local requirement. They should align with this local culture, values, and everyday life. And this requires central government to provide some kind of leeway to these municipalities and local governments in implementing participatory budgeting regulations. And the last one is also, we argue that it's very important to have a policy to form kind of future in-kind contribution so as to incentivize villages, people's forum, and citizens in maintaining infrastructure selected to the participatory budgeting process. Thank you so much. I pass on to Callum.
Thank you. I will focus on the micro level, the community level, and in relation to our findings from the interviews we conducted with the local community and then various other stakeholders at the local level, including municipality officials. So we have made in our document, we have made a couple of main recommendations at the community level. So it's based around the adding more emancipatory features in terms of the space and voice the PB can offer for the local engagement. So that means, in other words, the local government at level, the space and the voice of the parts actors at like including community and the local officials has to be more strengthened, taking some interventions by the state and the other stakeholders who are advocating the participatory budgeting in these emerging economies in particular. So the main reason behind that is the context specificity and then the different interpretations of participatory budgeting by actors at the local level in very different countries. And then, for example, in Benin experience, if I highlight one or two, not taking much time, the PB we have seen that is operate as an emancipatory device successfully, and then for in particular that we have seen that the marginalization of women gradually improving, more women participation, and also we have seen that the local groups like the local community and then municipality officials, they use some they reframe the solutions to cater the community needs, and in other words, they were using this as a kind of obtaining more resources and redirecting the government funded resources into the much needed the areas in local needs of the local needs they identified as a group. So specifically talking of these main recommendations in the to encourage the local engagement, so we are suggesting an evaluation of the outcomes of PB selected projects need to be carried out and communicated to the local people and the decision makers. It is currently happening, but at the current assessments are very much at the community level, and it is like a project-based assessments. But we suggest that the more wider sort of assessment of the local, taking local as a broader unit, and then to understand that how this PB is been working, and then the outcomes and the assessment results is regularly periodically communicating back to the local inhabitants and the decision makers, and that make it more closer engagement of the parties involved, and then the in the sense that who are the users of this PB and the local inhabitants and the decision makers, as well as the national and regional level, the people who are involved in the investment decisions. The second main one is the community level participation must become a homegrown one, not rely on continued external support. At the moment, it's overly managed. These projects are overly interfered and managed by the external partners like non-governmental organizations. And then because of that, once the projects are finished or completed the duration, then it's a problem of sustainability and sustaining this project for the long run. So that's where one of the weaknesses we have seen, and in particular that we have seen that the limited reliance on existing traditional communities and the gatherings in these communities. So enhance participation of this local inhabitants, and then homegrown sort of management of these PB projects is very important, and then that make this PB implementation more effective in our observations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be doing the last presentation. Of, as you've seen from the team and as we've done, is we present our sort of recommendations and findings in sort of justifying them from the point of view of what we could do at the community level, what could be done at the national level. And these are clearly key areas where we obviously see, as Philip has mentioned, a lot of potential, not just in Benin, but of course of countries around the region as well. So applying that to a wider set of countries. However, at the same time, we also think that you know, from our own investigations and the own explorations, that also at the international level, So today we have also an audience of international agencies, funding agencies, international policy-making agencies, who may have also an understanding, okay, what could be done at that level as well. So that's the third leg of our recommendations. And the findings come from the ground in terms of picking up, for example, how the ministries and the government officials obviously were quite keen and involved in terms of ensuring that they had the right tools to meet the Pefa assessments, for example. So we saw a kind of, a sort of reaction and response to Pefa assessments, for example, but other types of assessments, not only from the Pefa level. So our recommendation is obviously following through from this, is incorporating PB within the broader PFM framework at the international level. So when assessments are carried out, for example, like obviously the most known, the Pefa assessments, but any other type of assessments by particular donor nations or donor agencies, then probably one of the elements that we'd be interested to know is what is the extent of participatory budgeting going on within the country. So we see here a recommendation that was developing a country level indicator to look at the extent of PB practice, PB deployment in that country. Following from that, of course, is also to try to bring together different parties at the international level, an international community of practice. There are already different agencies, different organizations at the international level, and how to bring them together, perhaps to develop more guidance towards the use of PB. I have tried to here make some connections, of course, there's already many efforts, for example, the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency. There are already indications of how to embed participation, citizen participation in fiscal policy, in budget decision making. Interestingly, other well-known indicators, for example, the Economic Intelligence Unit Democracy Index, doesn't really highlight also the element of participation by the public in fiscal decision in PFM systems. So we think the idea of integrating a sort of PB indicator in different types of democratic indicators, democratic evaluations is also quite important. So it's about putting forward proposals. Therefore, what we say at this level is to look at the Pefa indicators that exist and a slight amendment or adjustment to recognize the role of PFM. And the reason is basically underlined again to conclude here. What we see on the ground is obviously engagement and enthusiasm, as you have seen from my colleagues, but also the possibility of multiple variations, the possibility of multiple agency, multiple influences in terms of how it is implemented. So here, therefore, at the international level, what we see is a chance of probably not prescribing, not imposing, not mandating, but rather coming up with a fairly set of principles and ideas and recognizes an indicator at the international level. So that's what I want to add to the final list of recommendations and findings. Thank you. Philip? You're muted. You're muted, Philip.
Philip, you're muted.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I was saying that in a nutshell, this is our research and the key finding. So we can, we welcome any comment, any feedback or any. Thank you. Yeah.
So thanks very much. Thanks very much for the very good presentation and for the very good work. If you can mute, Philip, please. If you can mute. Thank you. Okay. So thanks for the work. I like the way the recommendations are broadly summarized under national, subnational, and international. I mean, well, you've strongly talked about there's no size that fits all. You've talked about the need. I mean, I'm not summarizing what you've said, just to bring out a few points out of it. The need for the communities to take ownership. I think that's very core. And the aspects that at the international level, we can continue to support participatory budgeting. So that's really good. So we'll go to the interventions now. We'll have some colleagues give some comments. And I would like to start from the stakeholders in Benin itself. As Rosemary said, the research team has already engaged very closely with stakeholders in Benin in the process of undertaking the research. And that is very good practice, if you ask me. So I'd like to invite some partners in Benin as well to give some perspectives. I'll ask some pointed questions and they can respond to me. So I have Jarvis Loco, governance and democracy experts, who has an NGO, ALCRER, so that I don't mispronounce, based in Benin, and has been an active player in participatory budgeting development in Benin. So after supporting several local authorities in the implementation, in 2020, he led the drafting of the National Reference Guide for Participatory Budgeting in Benin on behalf of the Ministry of Decentralization and Local Governance. So Jarvis will make his remark in French, and Felipe has kindly agreed to translate the intervention to English. So bear with me. So Jarvis, my question to you, as a key NGO stakeholder in participatory budgeting in Benin, how would you strengthen participatory budgeting process so that it would make the most difference on the ground and driving effective service delivery? So over to you, Jarvis.
Okay. Bonjour à tous. Nous, au Bénin, ici, le budget participatif suscite beaucoup d'espoir dans les collectivités locales parce qu'il offre véritablement l'opportunité aux communautés de...
Sorry, if I may intervene. Felipe, what I would suggest is you take note of his comments and then you can translate thereafter. So if you just go on mute now, and we have Jarvis make his comments. Jarvis, over to you.
Oui, Gervais, tu peux recommencer, s'il te plaît?
Ok, donc je disais que chez nous, le budget participatif suscite beaucoup d'espoir aux collectivités parce que ça offre vraiment l'opportunité aux communautés de pouvoir s'exprimer librement sur leurs besoins, sur les attentes, parce que elles intègrent un processus qui était jusque-là géré par les spécialistes en finances publiques. Donc, c'est une sorte de démocratisation de ce processus qui était réservé seulement aux initiés des finances publiques. Pour nous, organisation de la société civile, notre rôle a été surtout de contribuer à la diffusion de l'approche. Nous avons appuyé sa mise en œuvre technique auprès des collectivités locales. Nous avons surtout assuré la mobilisation sociale lors des forats, les forats qui permettent aux communautés de s'exprimer, d'exprimer leurs besoins, de les hiérarchiser, de les prioriser, de les présenter aux autorités au niveau local. Pour nous, il y a 3 défis qui sont à relever. Le premier défi, c'est de stabiliser la méthodologie de mise en œuvre du budget participatif avec la mise en place de règles communes pour l'ensemble des acteurs. Et c'est pour cela que nous avons travaillé récemment à l'élaboration d'un guide national de référence pour permettre aujourd'hui de savoir qui met en œuvre correctement le budget participatif ou qui ne le met pas bien en œuvre. C'est vraiment un cadre normatif qui permet aux acteurs de pouvoir utiliser cette approche sans problème. Le deuxième défi, c'est d'éviter la récupération politique parce que les élus commencent par s'intéresser à ce processus et il y a un risque très fort que les objectifs de développement qui entourent cet outil soient détournés par la propagande politicienne. Troisième défi important pour nous, c'est le financement même de l'implémentation de l'approche. Alors, sur les communes du Bénin qui ont expérimenté le budget participatif, il y en a très peu qui ont financé elles-mêmes la mise en place des processus. Donc, il y a à trouver une solution véritable, une solution durable à ce problème de financement de l'approche. Voilà les trois grands défis auxquels la société civile béninoise s'attelle en ce qui concerne l'implémentation de cette approche. Et je voudrais finir mon intervention en remerciant la Banque mondiale pour cette étude qui nous apporte un éclairage sur les pratiques que nous avons engagées il y a quelques années. Cette étude est pour nous un appui important dans le cadre de l'appropriation institutionnelle et sociale de cette approche participative. Je vous remercie.
Thanks, Gervais. So, Philip, if you can summarize in 1 minute.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. He started by saying that participatory budgeting has been welcomed enthusiastically in Benin because it give local communities and citizens a forum to express themselves, particularly express themselves about what is more important for them, what is, about their need and what is more important for them addressing their everyday kind of problem and hassles. And he also pointed out that until PBE was introduced in Benin, PFM issues tend to be confined to PFM experts. Now this has been to some extent a bit being kind of putting a bit of democratic process. So for the people concerned with their own problem can be able to given a voice basically to come in the process. And the role that NGO and civil society have been playing in that process is about community mobilization and also the diffusion of information around the process and how the community may embed it in their new logic, in new logic. He also highlighted three main challenges that they are experiencing. One is to try to establish a common method or approach in undertaking PB in Benin municipalities. One main method is not necessarily having the same approach, but at least they follow similar guidelines in undertaking the PB. The second, on the first again, they are now trying to issue a framework that is going to, again, framework on a principle basis, basically that they're going to make municipalities adopt. It hasn't been adopted yet, but is at a stage, soon this may happen. The second challenge is a political takeover. It seems like the way things are working, the politicians now kind of saying interest, and the worry is it may be taken away. So very careful so it doesn't happen. So it doesn't become a political kind of instrument. And the final one is the financing of a PB process. And he mentioned that up to now the process has been fully funded by donors. Out of 25 municipalities recently, little have been able to fund the process themselves. So there is a worry that if donor funding dries up, this may be, there may be a problem carry on, going forward. And he thanking Pefa and World Bank.
Okay, thanks very much, Felipe, and of course, Gervais as well. I guess that takes us more than the 3 minutes we're planning for each discussant, but it's understandable, very interesting discussion. So thanks for that great intervention. So we'll also like to hear from another player in Benin, a development partner with GIZ, who is the coordinator of the reform project. And I'm talking about Jackie Barbosa. So Jackie has a good experience on participatory budgeting in Benin as well, but as a development partner. Jackie would also be making his remark in French, and Felipe, you're going to summarize in 1 minute. So Jackie, if you can use 2 minutes to give us your interesting perspective, and then we'll have Felipe use 1 minute to summarize. And my question to you, Jackie, is, as a key development partner working on participatory budgeting in Benin, what are the roles and perspectives of different stakeholders on this subject? And how do they come together on making participatory budgeting more sustainable in the future? And just before you go ahead, I want to tell our participants, I see we're having very interesting questions on the chat. Please keep it coming. And I see that our authors are already responding to some. So we'll respond as much as possible and take some after the discussion. So over to you, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Jackie from Benin, but to gain a time, I will try to go in English. Maybe if it's approximative, maybe Mr. Philip can add something. Thank you for your question. We have many parties who act in this BP process in Benin. And I don't have the time to talk about all parties, but the role of the mayor is very important because here is a voluntary offer. The mayor have to decide to transfer decision-making power to citizens on the allocation of part of public resource in relation with their needs. So the initiative is the mayor who take the initiative, and we, as a partner, we accompany these things. And the local councillor also, who have the responsibility to vote the budget, have enough responsibility in this process because they have to decide how much resource to be allocated in this exercise. So it's important. And in our country, the state have a big responsibility to create the incentive environment for PB and to ensure the transfer of resources and to accompany the work of mobilizing communal tasks, which is the responsibility of the centralized service of the Ministry of Economy and Finance. Citizen role also are very important in what we experiment here. They have the commitment, they have to pay the price of their commitment through the availability, the mobilization, and possibly the physical or financial contribution in support of various projects. So the perspectives party are both done to inclusion and participation of the public, which enhance better understanding and policy acceptance. Like my colleague Loko Jeve said, in Benin, the critical mass of municipalities that experimented PB is still very low. Maybe 25, we have 75 municipalities, and it is often under the impetus of PTF. For the sustainability of the PB implementation, I think it depends on a number of requirements. I will just talk about two. The political and social communication is very important, and the inclusion of the PB in the tests are very important to have the same guideline and to help municipality to make the process by using the same framework. The implementation of capacity building plan, which will involve actor, also is very important. So among the experiences reported by JZ in Benin, 11 municipalities and 112 community initiatives have been impacted on investment of 750 million CFA in various crucial sectors. It's very important, and it's easy to see that PB, by promoting local investment, that meets the need expressed by the population, we can also observe observe the reduction of fiscal incivism in some municipalities that fully implement PB. So we will continue working on PB in our new PFM project, but things are very simple at the national level. We will also continue in municipal, in a decentralized level, and it's what I can quickly summarize, like our challenge for the next step and what we do in the past in this topic.
Thanks very much, Jackie, and you were very clear. So there's no need for any interpretation or emphasizing again. So Philip, thanks for being on the standby. I mean, you really make your point. It's really nice to indicate that there are so many participants, so many so many stakeholders who are taking part in this process. That's really cool. You also emphasize the need for capacity building, which I agree with you. If we get to have very effective intervention, then capacity building becomes also very pertinent. But also the asking side, we need to get the participants to ask, to demand, and I mean, it's called in demand for governance. And I see somebody asking that question already on the chat. So let's come to the World Bank. I have my colleague, Saidu Dio, who is a senior public sector specialist with the World Bank, but also working on Benin. So he's got very good focus on public financial management in Benin. So Saidu, as a World Bank expert and with your experience on public sector reform in Benin, how do you see participatory budgeting as part of the wider governance, public financial management, and service delivery agenda? And if you can just look at it from a municipality PFM perspective. Over to you, Saidu.
Hello, yes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Nikki, for this introduction. I would like to first start by thanking the researcher for this well-written document, and which will certainly contribute to our public sector work in Benin, which focus on strengthening the capacity of core government institutions to improve the quality of service delivery in the priority sector. So for the sake of time, I would like to make two very quick points on the upstream and downstream side of the PFM cycle of our work in Benin. On the upstream side, I see an opportunity for the participatory budgeting to help improve the domestic revenue mobilization agenda through fostering taxpayers' voluntary compliance. As you may know, the talent assessment conducted jointly with IMF in Benin in 2019 revealed some remaining gaps in terms of tax administration effort to improve voluntary compliance. And the country score on this particular indicator was very weak. So we see the participatory budgeting as an opportunity to give to local taxpayers a sense of community and the feeling of being a good citizen to comply voluntarily with a tax obligation, but also holding accountable the tax administration in their role to ease tax compliance measures. So on this angle, the collaboration and dialogue between the local tax administration and local taxpayers could be established and strengthened through the participatory budgeting approach. This is one point. Second one, on the downstream side of the PFM cycle, participatory budgeting could also contribute to improve the quality of public investment management. So the report shows that the public can voice their concern and ask questions accordingly during the public hearing forums, but they lack the means to follow up on unsatisfactory replies. So there is therefore an ample scope for improvement on the current practice to engender greater societal benefit. In such situation, we see an opportunity to link the participatory budgeting with our ongoing citizen engagement support in the country to monitor the quality of public investment management in selected sector through the development of a citizen platform and the use of citizen scorecard to measure the quality of public investment. So this tool could certainly allow local communities engaged in the participatory budgeting process to emphasize on the quality of local public investment and make local authority accountable on gaps in societal benefits and expectation. So I will stop here and looking forward to the discussion. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Saidu. That was really clear, and it's interesting that I mean, even beyond this, we can expand it to other areas to be able to support the citizens. So thanks very much. So let me turn to Delen Makulo. Delen is head of climate finance in International Budget Partnership, and he's also, I mean, with other colleagues in IBP, been looking at issues of participatory budgeting. Also as part of the Pefa research competition. So, Delen, from your wider engagement and research work, what is the key challenge of participatory budgeting, and how do we address this? And from your I mean, given your own perspective, does that differ from the conclusion of the study in Benin that we just discussed this morning? Over to you, Delen.
Thank you, Adenike. And also thanks to Professor Lasau and the research team for this really informative research. I actually, to answer your last question first, I think my comments will align very closely with the study recommendations. As you said, IBP collaborates with civic actors, government champions in countries around the world, as well as in international organizations to ensure accountability for public finance management that supports equitable and sustainable development. And participatory budgeting and other forms of public participation in budget processes can help strengthen democratic norms and institutions and empower and build citizens' civic capacities and actually increase the impact of public budgets. And along with contributing to more equitable targeting and use of public resources, democratic innovations like participatory budgeting can actually transform the citizen-government relationship. However, these outcomes aren't inevitable. As you say, there's some challenges, and they need to be intentionally sort of baked into the design and implementation of these participation mechanisms in order for them to be truly transformative. So I'll keep my comments general. So these mechanisms must first of all be inclusive. This has been mentioned many times this morning. Often participation involves the usual suspects, those with information, interests, resources, and actual opportunities to engage. And when this happens, participatory exercises may only reinforce existing power asymmetries. So, and those who don't participate are often less educated, maybe from remote areas, poorer, and minorities or otherwise marginalized in their societies. And so we need to understand the barriers that these groups face and how to address them to actually deeply engage them in these processes. So at a minimum, governments need to ensure that there are sufficient resources for the process and for the outcomes. And they need to provide relevant information in ways that citizens can understand. And they need to facilitate dialogue and deliberation and ensure that citizens' decisions are actually linked to outcomes. And I'll note that participatory budgeting is often most inclusive and successful when you've got strong political backing from governments matched by strong engagement from civil society. This gets to that demand side question. The former is critical for the resources that are required and the commitment to the outcomes, but the civil society engagement is critical for broad and inclusive engagement and for ensuring accountability for the results. The process needs to be democratic, informed, and sustained. Some participatory practices are done as one-off exercises or include only a single input from citizens, for example, either a comment or a vote on a proposal. And these exercises don't really help citizens understand the issues, the government processes, or the trade-offs among competing priorities. And so the efforts miss out on opportunities to deepen citizen skills, understanding, and attitudes about public engagement. Conversely, these mechanisms also fail to better inform public servants about the realities behind citizens' needs and preferences. So it's important to see participatory budgeting as a long-term shift in the way governments and citizens engage around public resource decision-making, not as a quick fix. And finally, these exercises need to be meaningful. Often participatory exercises result in citizen input that goes into a decision-making black box. Those who participated don't actually know whether or how their inputs actually influence the decisions and impact on public services. So clarifying and deepening the links between citizen input and final decisions and outcomes will strengthen the citizens' trust and ensure more concrete impacts on their lives. Part of participatory budgeting appeal is that citizen participation will lead to direct action by governments through the implementation of the projects that were proposed by the participants. If this fails to happen, participatory budgeting or any form of public engagement becomes more of a consultative and information sharing process, and it doesn't empower the communities, and which actually undermines one of the main objectives. So let me stop there. I'm sure there'll be more to say during the Q&A, but thank you.
Delian, thank you so much. You know, each time I reflect on this topic, I would usually say there's a reason why the participatory is part of what we're talking about. So definitely those who were supposed to be doing the budget for us to be part of what we're doing. So I see your very strong points on involving the citizens, involving the community. So thanks very much for that. So let me come back home to the Pefa Secretariat, who commissioned this study, and I've been a core part of the study itself. And not only, I mean, it's not just a study for itself, but it's just to see how we can expand the conversation on public financial management and support countries to do this effectively. So I have a colleague here with me, Julia Dimitri, who is a governance specialist with the Pefa Secretariat. So Julia, so from your perspective, I'm probably speaking for your colleagues in the Pefa Secretariat. How is the Secretariat reflecting the importance of participatory budget in the participatory budgeting in the budget process itself? So over to you, Julia.
Many thanks, Nika. So many thanks for the opportunity to share some insight on how Pefa has reflected on the importance of participation in the budget process. The revised guidance for the subnational government Pefa assessment has introduced a new indicator, PI9, on public consultation. And the main rationale for its introduction is that it is widely recognized, and it came very strong from the presentation, but also from the esteemed discussant, that good public consultation practices can help the subnational government to be more accountable and responsive to their communities, to improve the public perception of the subnational government performance, and the value that public receives from the subnational governments. There are three key aspects that were considered important in the public consultation process and are captured by the three dimensions of the new indicator that has been introduced. First, we'll look at whether public consultation has been conducted in preparing the budget proposal, and whether it has been organized prior to the approval of the budget by the subnational council. And I mean, Pefa as a promoter of the good practices in the public financial management. So if you look in this dimension, what are some of the key principles and good practices that we are promoting? First, it is very important that in order to promote public consultation, it is important that accessible, and it comes, with the citizens living in remote areas and marginalized group, they have readable, friendly, and understandable information on the budget proposals. And this information has been made available to the public through different means. But also equally important, to make the public consultation meaningful, At the end of the public consultation, you express your opinions, your needs, your wants. It is very important that the government prepares a summary of the inputs received and an explanation of how those inputs have been taken into consideration. And in order to promote transparency and accountability, that this summary of information is publicly available. The second important aspect that is being assessed is it relates with the service delivery. I mean, there is no question that service delivery, we are all receiver of the service delivery from the government. So we look at whether the design of service delivery programs, but equally important, the redesign of existing programs has benefited from public consultation to meet the citizen needs and preferences. And again, what are some of the key principles and good practices that are being promoted through this dimension? First, inputs from the public consultation relating, for example, to the quantity, to the quality of the service, the tariff fee that are being applied, the provision and the delivery methods should be documented and be published by the subnational government. Second, the documentation should explain how the subnational government has taken into the account the inputs from the public consultation, going back to the previous point, in order to make the public consultation meaningful. And the third, arrangements should be in place to enable citizen feedback. And it relates, I mean, with using different means, such as formal mechanism, focus group, user surveys, town halls, or other possible means to enable citizen feedback on the service delivery. And the third dimension, and it was mentioned by one of the discussants, the importance in the PFM of the public investment management. So we look at the extent to which the public consultation has been conducted for the major investment projects done by the subnational government. And first, we look at the consultation should take place during the preparation of the major investment projects. The second good principle is that a clear summary of the major investment projects and the key results of the economic analysis should be provided at the beginning of consultation, and that all these findings and information is publicly available to the citizen. And so let me conclude by saying a few words on the process that was followed in terms of designing this specific indicator, but also the overall revised guidance for the subnational guidance. So the guidance itself benefited from extensive inputs from the working group, which was composed of representatives from the Pefa partners. But in addition, it benefited from extensive comments received during the public consultation that took place. So as you can see, we at the Secretariat have a practice that all the key guidance documents should be consulted broadly with the public. So as you can see, the public consultation principle has been integrated in our core work. And when it comes to these specific indicators, we also consulted different stakeholders, which are key in terms of promoting the transparency, accountability, but also the good practices when it comes to public consultation, such as GIFT and IDB. So the revised guidance is publicly available in the Pefa website, and I strongly encourage you all to have a look at it, but also more specifically to the indicator on public consultation. So let me stop here, and more than happy to take your question and comments. Over to you, Nika. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julie, and that's very, very, very helpful. I see your comments has responded to some questions, some asking about definition of participatory budgeting. So please look at the guidance, and you probably have some further understanding on that. Also, this report will be published. I mean, it will be made public, so you can get such comments. I mean, response to such comments. But at this point, I would like us to pick a few questions from the chat, and I would like to direct my first question to the authors, to Philippe, Kelon, Terevan, or Pavan. Any one of you wants to take it. And the question is, to what extent do conducive policy environments, sufficient funding to implement participatory budgeting projects, a committed mayor, and an engaged civil society need to be present before starting a meaningful engagement on participatory budgeting? And to what extent can we work with less than ideal circumstances? Meaning, if we don't have everything, I mean, what would be the core ones we need to have to be able to start this kind of project or support? So anyone wants to take that? And the practitioners in Benin can also answer. Philip, you're over to you.
Yeah, oh, thank you. I mean, I think Rosemary asked this question. It's an interesting one. The world is not ideal, and so it is very unlikely that we have all these conditions present in a setting before initiating PB exercise. And again, the process is based on learning by experience. So, I take the case of Benin. Without donors' support, financial support, mostly, PB wouldn't have been introduced in Benin. And at the time of introduction, none of these conditions really kind of much exist. Even political support and local political support wasn't present. Financial resources was not much available. And so sometimes we will have to take actions to trigger change. And I think this is what happened here. And at the moment, at least 1 or 2 municipalities in Benin now are starting to be self-reliant. So they kind of taking ownership of the process and funding themselves the whole thing. So to some extent, we could say even by trying to address one thing, we may address more. Like here, the financial availability was, the key input here. But again, now we can see kind of political buy-in and things. So, we're not saying that all these conditions must be present before we initiate the process, but but we can make change. We can try to initiate and see how things work. It may not work, and we need to learn from the process and do things differently.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful. Teravon, there's a question you responded to on the chat, but I think it's necessary we take it openly. So if you can help me with this. So it's specifically, Philip, if you can mute, please. It's specifically about the research work that you did, and it's asking if it's identified sources of local revenues, or do you depend on central government's annual budgets? So, Teravon, I know you responded, but I would like us to say it openly.
Thank you for the question. I think I responded by saying yes. That was one of the challenges. Is the way that the funding was ring-fenced or not, and in some cases the participation carried out, and then it turned out there was no money. So it's clearly one of these issues. So it's still dependent on central government funding in some cases. So yeah, I mean going back to Philip's point and the broader point made earlier is that you will have those challenges in terms of how to what extent the funding is there and ready in particular municipalities. Philip, is there anything you want to add on that?
Good, and still on you, Teravon, and I'll ask any of our discussants to also respond. And it's about the demand side. I mean, you'll agree with me that for many things that is happening in the world, I mean, I would usually say corruption is enshrined because we don't have a very strong demand for accountability. So how do we strengthen the demand side for participatory budgeting? And Teravon, I'd like to hear from you, and if any of our discussants can also jump in. So improving the demand side,
I think that's what we wanted to emphasize much more: participation of local structures, local communities, and existing. I mean, there are particular in other countries in Africa, in Kenya, and all of this. There are different what do you call, traditional structures for participating, for people to give their input, for local population to be involved in decision making. And I think it's about leveraging those so that we then approach this problem of limited or scripted participation. You know, the danger is this scripted participation where, because often I can see so many interests and so many pressures, we need to meet the deadline next week, we need to get it done by next week. So obviously then we engage into some sort of symbolic participation. But I think it's about identifying those local traditional ways of and then building from that. And then the issue will be less then, because at the moment the debate is all about making sure we are inclusive, making sure, and this is just another tick box, isn't it? It becomes another tick box. Make sure we get the right amount of people from these categories or these profiles. So we just get into another instrumental route, if you see what I mean. We're just trying to tick a box again. So we need to go back to the roots and say, this is where we should start getting the input of people.
Can I add a few things to that?
Yes, Kelom, you can add,
Yeah.
and I would like Gervais' perspective after Kelom as well. Gervais, I would like to know your perspective as a core stakeholder on grant. But Kelom, over to you.
Yeah, I think if I can complement Ivan's point further with the evidence from countries as well. For example, in Indonesia, so one of my other projects that we did, and then we found that the local communities are voluntarily participating to this PB projects and PB funded local development projects. They voluntarily participating. They had this. These were indigenous communities in East Java, so they had this informal, historically established informal mechanisms of social gathering, deciding what projects they need, what the local needs are, and then they are voluntarily giving their services for the construction projects. So that's the extreme example of how the PB working, and with the participation of the local. And then that's why we mentioned in our report that it's very important is the reliance on existing traditional community gatherings. That's how participatory budgeting started. The idea of participatory budgeting started by seeing how it's working, how people are gathering and doing this in Brazil. Some of the local villages in Brazil. That's how World Bank learned and brought this idea and then spread into other countries. So that's the essence. So local traditional settings and traditional community gatherings and informal participations. That's a sort of a essence of any PB success. That's where I think we have seen that in Benin. Already women participation has been increased. So there's a tendency that they are willing to engage with this. So there's a positive signs in that. It's mixed, that sometimes mixed feelings in the sense some areas need to be further improved and strengthened to get a further sort of support from the local communities and their engagement. That's what my thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Gervais, I'm still with you. I'm interested on the local ownership.
Gervais, on demande comment est-ce qu'on peut utiliser le budget participatif pour renforcer la redevabilité, la responsabilité des acteurs au niveau local, notamment les dirigeants, les gouvernants au niveau local.
Du processus de budget participatif. La redevabilité est une exigence du processus participatif. Vous savez, à la fin du processus, les populations qui avaient exprimé au départ leurs besoins peuvent demander des comptes. Nous avons au Bénin ici un mécanisme qu'on appelle l'audience publique de reddition de comptes qui permet aux citoyens d'interpeller les élus, de pouvoir les écouter sur la gestion des affaires publiques, comment elles ont pu gérer un certain nombre de leurs préoccupations. Donc, la redevabilité, c'est une question importante qui est au cœur du processus. Généralement, on la met à la fin pour permettre aux agents publics de pouvoir faire le point à la population et dire dans quelle mesure les besoins ont été pris en charge et les infrastructures qui ont été réalisées, comment tout ça, ça a été géré. Donc, pour nous, la redevabilité, c'est une question importante, elle est au cœur du processus.
Okay, just very briefly, he said PB is, I mean, accountability is at the heart of PB practices in Benin, often through what we call public hearing, where citizens ask local officials, I mean, local political or administrative officials to account for how they have delivered on public community need project and how they have delivered on public infrastructures in the community and stuff. So they, so this is happening, it's happening already, and is a follow-up on the PB exercise where they list their need, and then after they list their need and then implement it, they need to account for how they have been implemented, and of course how much resources involved and why and so on.
Thank you very much. And just for the information of everybody, Julia has kindly posted the revised guidance for the Supreme National Government Pefa assessment. So you can check the chat and probably download the revised guidelines. You can also find it on the Pefa website, pefa.org. So thanks, Julia, for that. So I have a question, and I want to get quick 1-minute comments from as many of the discussants as possible. So budget is not done just for its own purpose. I mean, this is my own question. We've had budgets, very good budgets in some countries, and now we're encouraging participatory budgets. What about the implementation? How do we ensure that citizens also participate in implementation, so that we can move closer to full implementation and effective implementation? So anyone that wants to pick that can just unmute and speak to that.
I don't know if I can say some.
Please go on, please go on.
Yes, you have the budget, but to implement it, you have to have the resources. So domestic resource mobilization is very important to make to be sure that what you plan will be implemented. And from my view, we have to work on the offer and the demand of participation. And if I observe what is doing here, I can notice that the civil society organization do much job by enhance capacity of people, and is so simple at a national level. But in community, people don't really know. So it's a big challenge. We have to explain them to have a large critical mass, and so then people can ask for demand and push those who manage public finance to be redevable. I don't know what to say. Philip, thank you.
To be accountable.
To be accountable. Thank you.
Well done, Jackie. Thanks. I mean, that's really great. And I see again the drive for citizens' demand in what you're saying. I would usually say one of the very effective projects I believe one can do is a citizen, it's a community development driven project, where you have the community themselves as a core part of delivering the project. They check all their money, they check all their funds, and this goes on very well. Any final thoughts from anyone? I just have a minute to close the session.
Can I say something?
Yes, please, say something.
Yeah, I think based on my understanding, most of the success story on participatory budgeting coming from South Korea. So it's makes sense to go and see how the South Korean local governments are implementing participatory budgeting, because most of the academic work, they refer to most recent work referred to South Korea when they have to show the success of participatory budgetary implementation. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Pawan. And I have a final question, and which just dropped in, and I think it's important we answer this question. It says, how do we get buy-in for increased participatory budgeting from governments where the political will is lacking? Perhaps donor I see the person is also already giving some ways we can do it, donor collaboration, but what other tools? So I think I should get a donor to speak to this. Saidu?
Yes, Nike. Yes, this is a very, as you know, a difficult question when there is no political will for to certain type of reform. And as a bank, we have different tooling instruments. We have our development policy lending instrument that we could leverage, to try to push for policy reform or difficult policy reform in some areas. So I think this will be an area that we will explore through the instrument of the development policy lending instrument. But beyond that, the ongoing dialogue that we have with the government to accompany in the development agenda. So I see, these are the two areas that I see. Continue policy dialogue at high level, and also using development policy lending, budget support operation to push for difficult reform, such as this participatory budgeting at local level. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Saidu. So at this point, let me just thank the researchers, Philip, Kelom, Teruven, and Pawan for the very good work, and of course to our discussants, Javed, Jackie, Saidu, Delin, and Julie. Thanks very much. So I hand it over back to Rosemary for the closing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nike, and thank you very much to the research team and the commentators for sharing their insights and experiences. And of course, big thanks to the audience for the active participation as well. So I don't intend to summarize the rich discussion, but maybe just to capture some takeaways, at least some that I have noted. So I thought it's interesting that participatory budgeting can play a critical role in strengthening kind of the social contract between citizens and the state, notably in creating incentives to pay taxes, which are seen necessary to finance public services. Also, the fact that participatory budgeting is an important element, but that its success hinges on a number of, preconditions or conditions. So we discussed whether they need to be present at the onset or not, but some of them are the need for sufficient funding to implement the chosen projects. And in that context, we noted the recommendation on a policy on the form of future in-kind contributions. We discussed the important role of the mayor. I think a very important topic of discussion was the willing and participating civil society. I think with the comments on community level participation, that needs to be homegrown and not at least forever rely on external support. That it should rely on existing community structures and gatherings. The need to include vulnerable and the relevant segments of the society, and not just, at least for the donors, to talk to the usual suspects, the way I understood it. In the context of a supportive political environment, there was a recommendation to set up a national agency as a forum and setting up guidelines with statutory backing. I think I also noted in that context the need to clarify and make clear the link between the inputs that is coming from the discussions at the local level and the outcomes in terms of financing decisions, and the importance of tailoring the process to the specific context, the fact that the exercise needs to be meaningful. And I think as such, it also became clear that it's quite a complicated process. It's not really a magic bullet. And I think from the paper, it was also clear that the cases where the municipalities that have been most successful were also those that had several years of experience and had gone through a couple of iterations. So I think that's also important to have realistic expectations in terms of what can be achieved. Yes, there were many more points, like the importance of involving the communities, including in the evaluation of the projects, as well as making sure that the projects are actually implemented. So I leave it there for my takeaways. Actually, just as a Pefa donor, also taking note of the recommendation to include PB in the broader PFM frameworks and assessments. But with these remarks, I will now conclude the sessions and ask you to keep an eye for the next Pefa webinar over the next month or so that will also focus on the research questions around PFM and service delivery in more detail. And also mention that if you have any other feedback on the research work, please don't hesitate to contact the Pefa Secretariat on services@pefa.org. And finally, and very importantly, I would really like to congratulate the staff of the Pefa Secretariat and all others involved in organizing this event and ensuring that it ran so smoothly. I really found it extremely interesting and insightful. So thank you very much. And please stay safe and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Fantastic discussion. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.